Climate Action Network, and Janet Williams.
Good morning. Find my place here and get the right microphone at the right level. I'm Janet Williams. I'm really pleased and honored to be here today. With me today are Dee Dee Holt and Jane Harris. Stand and say hello to these people. As you heard in the introduction from Liz, we're all three members of the Chatham Climate Action Network, often shortened to just Chatham CAN, which conveys a nice sense of optimism in the name, often even further shortened to just CCAN. So you can hear it referred to any number of ways. And as Liz said, Dee Dee and Jane and I come to our work here on the Chatham CAN with backgrounds heavy on the side of natural resource conservation, preservation, and protection. All of us share that background and that current passion. So our work, and as it happens, the other members of the steering committee of the Chatham CAN have similar backgrounds. So we tend to default to natural resource preservation and conservation as our knee-jerk reaction to anything that climate change threatens the town with. It's not a bad position to do that, but sometimes we have a tendency to overlook the side of what's driving climate change, which we all know is the accumulation of greenhouse gases, which trap heat in the atmosphere, and that's caused by the burning of fossil fuel. And so the energy side, the transitioning away from fossil fuel to renewable energy sources is something that is the critical foundation of addressing climate change. Chatham CAN is heavily weighted on the natural resource side, and partly that's because we share a conviction that in the face of the inevitable impacts that climate change is going to bring, no matter what we do about the emission side, so much of the greenhouse gas emissions are already in the atmosphere, and they have an incredibly long half-life, so that even if we were to cut emissions drastically, even to zero today, we still have impacts that are coming, that we can't change the fact that they're coming to us, but what we can do is prepare our defenses to be as resilient as possible, to figure out how to survive what's coming. And we know that question, we just saw it play out horrifically in the last 2 weeks, where people are trying now to pick up the pieces of their lives and move on. And with those as profound reminders of the threat that we all face, Chatham CAN feels this is the right time to be doing this. This is the moment. So next slide, please, Joe. So this is our mission statement. The Chatham CAN is a group of volunteers. None of us have any particular training or background, working to inspire and mobilize the Chatham residents, the businesses, the organizations, and I might add to that list the town itself, all members of the community, to act to minimize the impact of climate change by reducing our emissions and by building up our ability to survive and to be resilient in the face of what's coming. We are profoundly aware that Chatham's unique position, surrounded on three sides by water, our geography, our topography, put Chatham uniquely at risk and makes our work feel urgent, as we are seeing what's happening. We know how climate change, we're seeing it every day now. We see the storms hitting the coast, we see the erosion, we see what happens to last century's solutions to shoreline protection, which was largely in the form of hardening shorelines, seawalls, rock revetments. They no longer don't serve us, and we are seeing some of them are being destroyed by the very forces they were designed to protect against, but we've also seen that they cause further problems. And so we know that that's not the solution. We need 21st century solutions, and this is urgent work. Next slide, please, Joe. So let me tell you about where we came from. Chatham CAN is actually, this founding goes back to the establishment of the Cape Cod Climate Collaborative back in 2016, which was founded by a group of 12 organizations on Cape Cod, led by the Center for Coastal Studies, the Association to Preserve Cape Cod, Friends of Pleasant Bay, the Cape Cod Commission, a number of others who came together in the light of the optimism of 2016 after the Paris Climate Accords, where nearly 200 world leaders signed commitments to do something about climate change. Whether or not they upheld those commitments is another matter. But these 12 organizations said, we're going to sign commitments too, and they all did. And they set up the Climate Collaborative, and the Climate Collaborative began to realize that most of the effective action in addressing climate change is going to happen at the local level, at the town level. There are certain things that Cape Cod as a region can do and should do because, we're all facing the same threat. But a lot of actions need to be happening at the town level. So the Climate Collaborative began to work with volunteers in towns to set up these smaller entities, climate action networks. And there are now climate action networks operating in 7, 8 towns. Chatham is now one of them, along with Harwich, Orleans, Falmouth, a couple, I can't remember the other ones, but Eastham, yes. So in 2020, Roz Coleman, frustrated by what she saw as the lack of action in Chatham, pulled out her address book and came to us and said, if I can pull together people from the town of Chatham, will you come and help us establish a network in Chatham? And we said, sure. And I got the job of coming since I live in Chatham. And so that meeting in January of 2020 drew about 50 people to the community center who were interested in finding out how they could form a network here in Chatham. And of that group, about 8 or so raised their hands to say that they would serve on a steering committee to help organize the activities. And so thus was born the Chatham Climate Action Network and began its work with great enthusiasm. We're going to engage the community. We're going to spread the word about climate change risks and threats and what we can do. And we, because I'm a member of the steering committee, began to put together a plan for going to town meeting and handing out flyers and leafleting at the community center. And we all know what happened in February of 2020. COVID hit and everything stopped. And so the Chatham CAN said, well, we've gathered because we believe this work is urgent and we need to find a way to keep going regardless of what COVID has done to us. And if we can't get out there and hand out leaflets, we're going to learn how to conduct things online. And so, like everybody else, we pivoted to Zoom. And so we began to do a series of educational webinars on Zoom to invite the community to participate. Next slide, please, Joe. So we produced a series of webinars. The first one was called Chatham Acts on Climate, which brought together, I think, 8 or 9 town entities, organizations, businesses, to come and explain what to their organization climate impacts looked like and what they were planning to do about it and how they were going about doing their work so that people would begin to understand that this problem is in fact being addressed by a number of different entities and organizations. We addressed the problems of we're starting in the natural resources at a smaller level in landscaping. So we worked with the Chatham Garden Club to put together a webinar on why our individual landscapes make a difference and how we as gardeners can help be part of the solution. And then we did a deeper dive into what I explained as our foundational belief that natural resources are the best defense against the impacts of climate change. Ironically, they are also most vulnerable. So the urgency and the mandate of protecting those natural resources comes from both of those beliefs. They're critical to our overall defense, and they are very threatened, and if we lose them, we lose the ability to control what's going to happen. So we did that deeper dive, and then we did a deeper dive into health and diet, because the research has become clear that diet and the production of food is another element that is very connected to climate change impacts and drives some changes. We all know about beef production and things like that, and factory farming and what all of that can do. So we did all these webinars, and that was really interesting and a lot of fun. Next slide, please, Joe. So the town was listening and was paying attention to, not just because of what we were saying, but because the evidence was becoming incredibly clear. And so the town itself, through us, through all of us, the community, acting through town meeting, have taken some very significant steps. The climate emergency declaration was passed at town meeting in 2021. That is a bylaw that states as a matter of policy that the town believes that climate change is real, that its impacts are significant, that we need to reduce our contributions to greenhouse gas emissions as quickly, well, it got a little weaselly because a lawyer wrote it, not as quickly as possible, but as quickly as technically and economically feasible. But, you know, as quickly as possible, basically, was the concept. And it directs town officers and offices to take steps in the furtherance of these policies. And so we forget that we have this climate emergency declaration. It's a bylaw. Who enforces it? We do, the town does. So we have the ability to go and demand that town offices and officials take the steps that are necessary, because the town spoke at town meeting and passed that bylaw. At the same town meeting in 2021, they passed the Energy Efficiency and Procurement Bylaw, which is a gobbledygook way of saying, two parts to that. One part, the town committed to procure in its fleet, in its vehicle procurement, to have a preference for all electric or plug-in hybrid vehicles. And only if a vehicle would not serve the purpose for which it was needed, such as ambulances and school buses, which are not yet commercially available in electric versions, or they're coming that way, they would have to purchase electric or plug-in hybrid. Happy to report that that is underway. There is more and more procurement. We just heard Friday about the town just got its first F-150 Lightning pickup truck, which is a wonderful addition. So that's beginning to play out. The second part of that procurement is a requirement that when the town is requesting bids on capital projects, and that's largely construction projects, that the bidders have to, in their design bids, have to include a net zero option, which means the building that's being contemplated has to be net zero. It cannot emit any greenhouse gases that it's not removing at the same time. And there's different ways of making that balance, but that's baked into that bylaw. You know, we haven't had any capital projects that I'm aware of since then, other than the what went out for 1610. But I never saw those documents because they weren't publicly available that I know of. But we have these two affordable housing projects coming up, so it'll be worth making sure that everybody keeps in mind that those documents should have a requirement when the construction companies and developers are putting in their bids, that an option to make sure. It doesn't require net zero, it requires that it be thought about. And the reason that that's important is that when you look at it right in the very beginning, at the design phase of a project, you're thinking about costs, right? And everybody knows, or at least so far, everybody's assuming, and it's probably true, that at least at this point, construction costs for net zero buildings are somewhat higher, because you have extra insulation, you have extra EE glass, you have all these different things. But when you look at the long-term cost of maintaining and operating the building, the whole thing flips. And over time, it's far more economically efficient to run and build a net zero building than it is to build a conventional one. So this bylaw requires that people be thinking along those lines. And that's, we're talking about shifting ways that we have done things forever. And you do that in smaller steps, and these bylaws are designed to do that. The tree protection bylaw was passed in 2024 town meeting. It requires that a process be followed for the assessment of a tree that is proposed to be removed. If you have questions about it, and it's got some complications, Dee Dee Holt here will be happy to talk to you about that and explain which trees are covered by this bylaw, which are not. Again, it's a first step toward protecting all of the trees that we need to protect, because, my God, we need every single one of them that we've got. Again, they play a critical role in protecting against climate change. So Chatham has, in the form of the community, has begun to take these steps. Next one, please. So, in addition to supporting those bylaws, Chatham Can has also done a couple of other things. In 2023, we invited the candidates for the select board to come to a public hearing on climate issues and ask them a series of questions of where they stood and what actions they thought the town should be taking in response to climate change. It wasn't much of a debate. They unanimously said that climate change is real, it's a threat, we need to do everything we can. But it was good to have an opportunity, a forum to have them, that message repeat over and over in every single candidate. So we need to hold our select board, who have to a person voiced their support for these positions, make sure that they live that as well. Chatham Can works very closely with the town's Energy and Climate Action Committee. We share some members. We worked with them to develop the first beginnings of a climate plan for Chatham. The first one was called the Climate Roadmap for Chatham, which resulted in 3 recommendations that came out of it. One was to do a study of the vulnerable and threatened salt marshes in the town for lots of reasons that I'm happy to go into later. Salt marshes are one of the most important protections that the coastline has, and they are threatened at the same time by sea level rise because they will drown if they can't have some period of time where they are dry. They can't be inundated by water all the time. In a natural system, they will move back as the water rises, but in many places in Chatham, as elsewhere, that migration route is blocked by roads, by walls, by houses, by whatever. There's development in the way, and they can't move back anymore. So then you have the problem of what to do about them. So the Chatham Climate and Energy Committee has got funding and is currently producing and working on a study to look at the most important salt marshes, what their vulnerability is, and in terms of whether they are blocked by migration, and we need to think about another solution to keep them healthy and in place. The second thing on the climate roadmap was to declare that the town needs to move to renewable energy sources as soon as possible. And the third is that, and this is one that's going to come down the pike at us later and is going to require the whole community to rally around, truly the most cost-effective, because it costs nothing, response to increasing our protections against climate change is beefing up our regulatory and legal protections for vulnerable coastal areas, coastal floodplains, and inland floodplains. We've all now seen that coastal floodplains are not the only areas where floods can happen. When water rises, groundwater can rise, streams overflow, and inland areas get flooded as well. So we need to think more carefully about what we're allowing to be built and developed in these flood-prone areas and get tougher about that and protect those areas better. And that's going to be coming to town meeting near you soon. Next slide, please, Joe. So we are currently, Chatham Can is currently working, so we have a new project. And we figured we have done enough work in talking about the issue. It's time to do something. It's time to pick some actions and figure out what the town should be doing. And the town, through the town manager, Jill Goldsmith, and a number of town managers, have agreed to work with us. So this is a very unique approach to climate action planning. It's a citizen and town partnership, public-private partnership in some way. We're happy to do a lot of the heavy lifting, informed by the town's priorities and needs. And so the reason that we can do this is that what the actions you take have largely already been defined in a large body. So in 2021, I can't quite see, but there's a picture there of the Climate Action Plan. That is the plan that was developed by the Cape Cod Commission. And it was built on a lot of engagement done in all 15 towns, including Chatham. Several times they came here and held listening sessions and engagement sessions with people who made suggestions, and professionals in different sectors such as transportation and building and education all made suggestions as well. And so all of it got put into this Climate Action Plan. There's a database, a spreadsheet of about 400 actions that plan encompasses. So many of them have already been vetted. They've been defined in terms of, what steps would need to be taken to take this action, who would have to do that, by when, what's the timeline for doing that, critically, what resources would be needed to take this action, and how would you get the resources to the people who need to act. Oh, that's all the hard part of planning. But the Cape Cod Commission, because they are professional planners, have done a lot of that work for us. So with that behind us, we said, working together, we can do this. So we put together this process. We formed a work group. It's a small group of people from Chatham Can and some from the town who are this core work group. And the idea is to engage the community as we go along. So we have developed surveys. So surveys of nonprofit organizations we started with, and we asked the basic questions. Do you think that climate change is already impacting your organization? Do you think it's going to have a bigger impact in the not too distant future? What have you been doing? What would you like to do if you were able to, and who would you like to work with in doing that? So that gives us a whole lot of information about organizations and their abilities to combine together and work collaboratively. We've sent one out to businesses as well, and so we are now starting to pull in some of the responses to that. And because we believe that a plan has to have a starting point, which is now, so where are we now, led to the realization that we needed to create a catalog of what's already happening. So on the businesses and the nonprofit side, we have these survey responses that tell us what they're already doing. But for the town itself, we did a number of interviews and with research with town officials, and we found out, we've got a database now of 60 items that are already either completed, are in progress, or are in planning and about to start. 60 different climate actions, and we've categorized them in different groups, whether they're aimed at coastal resilience, renewable energy, energy conservation, education, et cetera, and so we can sort them anyway. These are just a couple that jumped off the sheet when I looked at it. The Muddy Creek restoration, which was completed a couple years ago, is a resounding success in restoring that particular ecosystem, and is now leading to a new project that's coming at us. It's on the list, but it's not here, at Jackknife Beach to restore that salt marsh and protect that against being loved to death, as it were. The Low-Lying Roads Project, the study was recently completed with the Cape Cod Commission. 2 areas were selected. That's now going into planning stages to come up with for Ridgevale Beach and Morris Island, for what do you do about those roads that once they flood, and that flood is, inevitable, they cut off communities. So how do you deal with that? So that's coming up into the planning stages. Chatham is a participant in the Municipal Vulnerability Program. That's a state program. We went through a vulnerability assessment back in 2018. It's about to be updated for 2025. So that'll be coming, and there'll be a number of community gatherings and listening sessions. So please, if you see that, go. Learn about what Chatham's vulnerabilities are and what the possibilities of solutions might be. The various bylaws, and we know that we have a particularly vulnerable population of senior citizens here, many of whom have not the resources to evacuate if a hurricane comes, who have limited means. And so the Council on Aging, working with other entities, have put together some information and communications. You all know about the reverse 911 calls that we all get now. They also have transportation set up, and heating and cooling center set up. So working to protect the most vulnerable population is definitely part of this, and it's on our list of plans. So it's very exciting to look at this list, and you realize that things are happening. Are they happening fast enough? No way. But, they are happening, and that early sense that we had that we were sitting here going, nothing's happening, isn't so. Things are happening, but they need to keep going. Next slide, please, Joe. So we know that partnerships and collaborative action is the way to make things happen, is the way to move the needle. So community actions. There are a number of nonprofits, environmental organizations, churches, who are all interested in this area, who have a stake in preventing climate impacts from happening and addressing them. And through partnering and working together is the way to make things happen. So we just put down here the churches, the organizations, us, the CCAN, the conservation, it should say Chatham Conservation Foundation. The Conservation Commission is part of the town, but the Conservation Foundation, in fact, the Conservation Foundation led last year on Earth Day. They convened, I think it was something like 16 different events, working in partnership with these other entities in town to create all these different kinds of events and educational outreach. The Friends of Chatham Waterways, the Energy and Climate Committee, the library. If you saw last week's Chronicle, the library is the first on Cape Cod to begin the process of being certified as a sustainable library. So Amy Andreessen's doing great work there, and that's also, and the Council on Aging, as Leah Lacrosse was telling us, is also getting very active in this area. But it's not just this community. Again, Cape Cod is at risk across the board. So next slide, please. There are opportunities to act together collectively at the regional level. The Cape Cod Climate Collaborative and the Cape Cod Commission. I mean, the Cape Cod Commission is regional. It's the county planning agency. The Association to Preserve Cape Cod, the Compact of Cape Cod Conservation Trusts, other churches across the Cape, and the Barnstable County Cooperative Extension. All of these entities are active, and again, if we can figure out ways to connect with them and partner with them on particular projects, it greatly amplifies the chances of getting funding, the impact of the project, the ability to reach people with the project. The more entities that are part of a partnership, the more important the project becomes. Next slide, please, Joe. But all of that means that we as individuals have responsibilities as well. You know, the time for sitting back with our phone or our remote control in our hand is long gone. You know, we are responsible for being informed. We need to give them as informed as possible. And there's no shortage of information available to help us get informed. And in fact, one of them, the Climate Collaboratives, I forgot to put a slide, darn it. Its Net Zero Conference is coming up on October 24th, and it's called Climate Actions for Everyone, individuals, businesses, and organizations. And it's going to be doing some really careful dives into the overall resounding question of what can I do, with some very actionable ideas. So the event is free. It's at the Highport Convention Center in Hyannis. It's 8:30 to 3. Breakfast and lunch are going to be served at no cost, thanks to our sponsors. And if you go to capecodclimate.org, you can sign up for it. In fact, the link is in the main sheet this week. So if you got the main sheet on Friday, there's an announcement in there and a link that takes you to the registration. So please sign up and come and get informed and get engaged. Come and meet the other people from other towns who are working in this area. And make sure you start showing up. Make your voice heard. Go to select board hearings and zoning and conservation commission hearings that are impacting the resources that we're trying to protect. Ask tough questions. Be heard. Support the solutions that are coming down. And just get involved. If together we can address these threats and make this a better town all around. So that's what Chatham Can is. And thank you for allowing us to be here today. Oh, she said no applause, no applause.